If you notice anything different about this image, it's the Rotten Tomatoes page for The Acolyte. And if you notice, there's no audience score on here anymore. Apparently, Rotten Tomatoes got the word from Disney that they need to delete that because it's just massive embarrassment for them. A lot of people have been pointing out how The Acolyte only had a 14% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. And they were maintaining that it's just review bombing and ignore them. But they seem to be putting a lot of stock into this if they're going to go out of their way to have it deleted like this, because it really does indicate that it's not just simply review bombing. It's actually audiences just don't like their show and they don't want to get word out about that. You're probably going to start seeing a lot of their shills working overtime on social media to try to pump up this show. But fact of the matter is we're 6 episodes in and apparently no one's watching it and actually declining viewers with each episode. But still, the media is trying to defend it because, you know, they're getting their marching orders for Disney. They want that access, so they're going to do what they're going to do. Like we had this article came out from Screen Rant a couple days ago. Exclusive data suggests The Acolyte is a Star Wars success story despite the backlash. Exclusive data, in other words, like we don't tell you how we're getting this data, but it's really there. So just kind of trust me, bro, on this one. They do explain that it's from this other analytical place. Screen Rant has spoken exclusively to Real Good, a third-party analytics firm who examine, so typo right there, viewing trends across all U.S. streaming platforms. Based on the monitoring of 20 million monthly viewing decisions, they've looked through their data to see how The Acolyte compared to other live-action Disney Plus Star Wars TV shows. The results are surprising and indicate The Acolyte may be a lot more popular than many believe. And then they have this chart right here. It shows where The Acolyte ranks according to their charts. They don't really explain how they get their numbers exactly. They just say it's a measure of engagement. So within the first 14 days of the premiere episode, The Acolyte is the second most successful in terms of streaming and engagement, outperforming the average top 100 TV shows by a factor of 6. That just means people are talking about it, and that's pretty much it. It doesn't necessarily mean it's successful, but again, we don't know how they actually measure these sort of things. It's not necessarily them saying there's a lot of viewership, because if the viewership numbers were good for it, they'd be saying as much, but they're saying it's engagement, which really leads me to believe that the rest of the numbers aren't good, because I mean, engagement doesn't really mean anything. A dislike on a YouTube video counts as engagement. That doesn't necessarily mean people like the video, but they definitely engage with it. Or a negative comment, that's engagement too. That doesn't necessarily mean people like it. And I'm thinking we're getting a lot more of that engagement when it comes to The Acolyte than we are getting a lot more positive engagement, which would kind of coincide with a lot of the backlash that it says in this article. It's getting a lot of backlash, but it has high engagement. Yeah, that's negative engagement. And the reason why I'm also thinking that it doesn't talk about the viewership of it, because the other metrics that we have from third-party sites that are measuring actual viewership are not good for it. Like we just got the Nielsen ratings for the first 2 episodes of The Acolyte when that came out, and you can see it actually reached number 7 on their streaming originals. And that's for the first 2 episodes. 488 million minutes viewed, which sounds good. It reached number 7, but I mean, if you actually factor that in, like the way they measure it is the amount of minutes viewed divided by however long those episodes were, gets how many people are actually watching it. And with around, I think it's like 76 minutes for the first 2 episodes, 488 million minutes viewed, which means it's around 6.5 million people watched it, which I guess 6.5 million isn't anything to scoff at, but it's not the 11.1 million that Disney was claiming that they got. So 6.5 million, significantly lower than that. And even then, the 11.1 million would have been lower than a lot of other Disney Plus Star Wars shows. And now things are even getting worse for it too, because we have other analytical sites that are saying that The Acolyte in the last couple episodes have just fallen off of the streaming charts altogether. Leslie Headland's The Acolyte fell off a top 10 chart and tracks viewership data for various streaming originals. As noted by X-User Now It's Known, data analytics company Illuminate released their streaming originals television chart for the week of June 29th to July 4th, 2024, the week that the 6th episode of The Acolyte premiered, and the show was nowhere to be seen on the chart. The lowest show on the chart, Apple TV's Presumed Innocence, clocked in 282 million minutes watched. I have the tweet pulled up that shows this chart that they're talking about in the article, and you can see Presumed Innocence, like I said, is number 10. Number 1 is The Bear, and that's 1.2 billion minutes viewed. But one thing I'm noticing when I'm looking at this is it's kind of strange. There's not like any other sci-fi type shows out there or anything like that. Nothing that's kind of playing to the same type of audience. Yet you don't see any Star Wars show on here. Like, you would think the Acolyte would be able to be on the top 10 chart and maintain a spot in the top 10 chart, if not being number 1, especially when you consider how much money that they actually spent producing it. But that's not the case when it comes to this show. Disney spent billions of dollars to acquire the rights to Star Wars because it was the biggest franchise in the world, and they thought, we want to own that. We want to make that money from it. But so far, they have yet to actually make money from it. Yeah, there was some success with the sequel trilogy. When those came out, like, those did make money. They didn't make as much money as what people thought because of how much they spent on them, but they did still make money. But other than that, pretty much everything that they made Disney Star Wars related has lost money for the studio, especially when you consider their Disney Plus Star Wars series are just being dumped onto their own platform and aren't making a money on their own platform because their own platform isn't even making money. So you can see this being the case where Disney's looking at this, they're seeing it's dropping off of the charts. It's having such a terrible audience score on places like Rotten Tomatoes. They're in full-blown panic mode at this point. Or at least I'm assuming they're in full-blown panic mode because they spent $180 million on this series and they can't even retain the audience pretty much for half the series because it did peak around episode 3. That's when you had the lesbian space witch scene. And after that, viewership has just basically been on a steady decline. And when you have the 5th episode, which was supposed to be a huge action set piece that kind of draws viewers back in, that really wasn't enough. And then when we saw episode 6, we saw viewers just further decline from there. It's unclear what kind of viewership the Acolyte brought in or whether or not the show saw a decline this week or not. The reason being is that Luminate reported last week that the Acolyte only brought in 332.2 million minutes watched. Given that the lowest show clocked in at 282 million minutes, it is possible that the Acolyte saw its viewership increase. However, this would defy the quickly forming trend of the show. And here is kind of the trend that it's talking about. So the premiere episode brought in 210 million minutes watched, and then it got to 380.5 million minutes in second week. And then it dropped by nearly a third to 262 million minutes in the week after that, followed by 332.2 million minutes in episode 5. So yes, episode 6, it most likely is going to track along these lines where it's also losing viewership. And this is what Disney did when they got a hold of Star Wars. They put a bunch of people in charge who, I would say by all accounts, don't actually like Star Wars. They don't respect the lore or respect the fans, particularly whenever fans are voicing their opinion on it. They just try to dismiss them as a bunch of ists and phobes and other things like that. When they're pointing out how they're breaking the lore, they're just saying like, oh, well, don't worry about it. That stuff's non-canon, or we can do what we want. We can change it how we want. Wikipedia went to bat for them and actually changed their site in order to try to cover up glaring error in the Acolyte. And then when you see review sites like Rotten Tomatoes actually take down the audience score, it's pretty obvious that Disney's trying to flex their muscle within the industry in order to try to, hopefully, I think in their minds that they can gain back some audiences, because I think in their mind, people aren't watching it because they see it has a bad score. I don't necessarily buy that because I think audiences will watch what they want to watch, especially if they're already subscribed to Disney Plus. If they're wanting to watch it, they would have done it by now. It's not like anyone had Disney Plus and is dissuaded from watching it because of the audience score. So the only reason why they're getting rid of it right now is just simple vanity, and it's an act of desperation, like I was saying, because they don't know what they're going to do, because people aren't tuning in for their show. No one likes it, and they spent $180 million, and it's going to be another flop, and it's definitely not going to get any new subscribers to Disney Plus, and it's definitely not going to get people excited for future Star Wars projects. And this is entirely their fault because they didn't want to listen to the fans. They wanted to try to tell their own story and essentially write Star Wars themed fan fiction. And this is the final result of all that. But let me know what you think about all this in the comment section below. Are you surprised by this? Did you think it was going to happen sooner, or is this still kind of surprising to you right now that they actually went through and got rid of the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. And also, if you haven't already, make sure you click that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date with the latest entertainment news. And don't forget to click that like button and share the video because it really helps out with the channel. Thank you.